Hey, welcome or welcome back. Grab your 20-sided die and a flagon of your favorite beverage, as we're going to learn today how we got from simple pixelated sprites to the jaw-dropping RPG epics of today. Some would say that the history of Dungeons & Dragons on PC is the history of the RPG genre itself, a wild 40-year journey of innovation, experimentation, and a few, well, let's call them questionable choices. So strap in, as there's a lot to cover and we're gonna be moving fast. It all started in 1988 with Pool of Radiance. This was the OG, the first official AD&D game from SSI, and it gave us the legendary Gold Box engine. You created a 6-person party and set out to clean up a monster-infested city of Flan. Its big leap? A brilliant split screen, first person for exploring and top-down tactical grid for turn-based combat. It was tabletop D&D on a screen, and it was glorious. It wasn't very newbie-friendly by today's standards, but in the 80s it was a marvel. And since you don't really fix what's working, SSI just kept building on it. Curse of the Azure Bonds from 1989 let you import your characters from the original into a new story about magical tattoos controlling people. 1990's Secret of the Silver Blades raised the level cap and threw you into an icy meat grinder. And finally, 1991's Pools of Darkness was the bonkers dimension-hopping finale where your level 40 heroes fought a literal god, to completion, however that may sound. The series established that your party could have an epic multi-game saga and feel as good as it would in a group of friends in somebody's dusty basement. As all of that was happening, SSI decided to branch out and take the engine on the tour to the realm of Dragonlance. Champions of Krynn from 1990 added a moon-phase magic for mages. 1991's Death Knights of Krynn had you face the iconic Lord Soth, and the Dark Queen of Krynn, released in 1992, was the trilogy's brutal, high-level conclusion. If you thought that with all of these games SSI would be done, you were wrong. Naturally, they kept milking the cow dry, and in 1991 they dropped Gateway to the Savage Frontier, which added a huge overworld map for exploration, and its sequel, Treasures of the Savage Frontier from 1992, did something revolutionary. It introduced a weather system and hints at character interactions deeper than stats, if not full-blown romances. While SSI may have left the proverbial cow looking like a dry raisin, they did something else too. They've opened a floodgate for imagination, for adventure, for countless hours of fun. By 1991, a new challenger entered the ring, and it was a true knockout. Eye of the Beholder by Westwood changed the game. It was the first ever real-time AD&D first-person dungeon crawler. The immersion, the feeling of urgency and danger that it offered was truly insane. You were clicking chaotically to sing swords as the monsters charged you, solving puzzles by manipulating objects on the screen and mapping out sewers of Waterdeep on a piece of paper at night under a dim blinking bloom of your desk light. It was visceral and atmospheric, and a huge evolutionary leap. Eye of the Beholder 2: The Legend of Darkmoon, that released later the same year, perfected the formula. It was bigger and prettier and is still seen as series' high point. 1993's Eye of the Beholder 3 was made by a different team and, well, it was okay. A bit of a step down. A reheated burger rather than the fresh meal, if you get my drift. But the second era of AD&D was far from done, and it actually got wonderfully weird with the release of Spelljammer Pirates of Realmspace in 1992. I mean, it was D&D game in space. It was a bizarre hybrid of a trading simulation, a space combat game, and a top-down RPG. An explosive concoction that should not work. And yet, it somehow did. Then there was Dungeon Hack in 1993, which used the Eye of the Beholder engine to create what I could only describe as one of the first D&D roguelikes, with randomly generated dungeons for infinite replayability. It was not perfect, sure, I mean it took years for procedural generation to be really good, but it was definitely unlike anything else. Talking about games that stood above the rest, one cannot not mention Forgotten Realms Unlimited Adventures from 1993. And for many gamers, it was a dream come true. It was basically the Gold Box construction kit, letting players build and share their own D&D adventures. It was a de facto birth of D&D modding. Note that down. Or not, like the video and come back to it, that will work even better. In 1993, SSI also debuted a new engine with Dark Sun Shattered Lands. It took us to a brutal desert world, had a great isometric view and introduced psionics. Its sequel, Wake of the Ravager from 1994, continued the story, but was known for being a buggy mess at launch. And since the internet was not really what it is today, day one patches, or patches in general, were not really a thing. As the technology marched on, so did D&D. Ravenloft's Strat Possession, released in 1994, was a massive leap, using a real-time first-person 3D engine to plunge players into a gothic horror. It proved that D&D could be both, deep and involving adventures and a reason to keep a spare pair of trousers at hand. 1995's Ravenloft Stone Prophet took the same engine to an Egyptian-themed horror setting. It changed too little to mention, and I always consider it as a standalone expansion rather than the new game. The same engine was also used for Menzoberranzan in 1994, and it was an ambitious but clunky attempt to let players explore the famous Drow City in full 3D. The third era of AD&D was all about innovation and experimentation, kinda like your time at college. And don't worry, it stays between you and I. Well, and that college's security cameras. In 1994, we received another genre-bending gem with Al-Qadim, the Genie's Curse. It was a charming, very Zelda-like feeling action-adventure set in an Arabian-inspired world. You're probably thinking now that all D&D and AD&D games were either huge hits or in the worst case decent at best releases. And I'm not surprised, as it felt like it. But the late mid-90s also had a legendary disaster. 1997's Descent to Undermountain was an infamous stinker. It tried to combine the Descent 3D engine with an RPG. A pretty courageous idea if you ask me, that sadly resulted with a nearly unplayable, buggy catastrophe that serves as a cautionary tale in D&D's evolution. But before we get to the next age of AD&D, we have to rewind back to 1991 for a minute. The original Neverwinter Nights is not a game you think of. And it was actually an AOL-based, first-ever graphical MMORPG. It used the Goldbox engine to let thousands of players adventure together online. Its importance is impossible to overstate, as it's a de facto a spiritual granddaddy of World of Warcraft and every other MMO since. What you're watching here, for obvious reasons, is naturally an offline footage. At this point in the video you're probably wondering if I was paid by SSI to promote them, and the answer is no. No one actually sponsors this channel. Which is a pity, as I'd love some sick RPG merch. Anyway, as I was saying, 1998 was the time that another player entered the ring, and BioWare dropped the bomb on a rather stagnant by then CRPG market. Yep, you guessed it right, it was Baldur's Gate. And it changed everything. I'd say single-handedly, but released a year earlier Fallout Hell 2. It was running on the gorgeous Infinity engine, and it gave us an epic story, deep companions with real personalities, and a brilliant real-time with pause combat system, where you could smack that space mid-battle, issue all the commands, plan out all the strategies, and then smack it again to watch it play out in real time. It was the total package and defined the modern fantasy RPG. Infinity Engine's genius, however, was not that it served a single game, but its flexibility. 1999's Planescape Torment used it to tell one of the greatest video game stories ever. A philosophical journey where you could talk your way through most encounters and where combat was relegated to a background activity. Then in 2000, Icewind used the engine for the exact opposite purpose. A pure, combat-heavy dungeon crawl where you created a whole party and took it through what felt like a bazillion incredibly immersive and tactics-heavy encounters. It was a bliss. When you say A, you just gotta say B, right? So another important release in 2000 was Baldur's Gate 2 Shadows of Amn. It arrived at the best possible time and perfected the original's formula. It is often cited as one of the greatest RPGs of all time, and for a good reason. It had a more personal story, deeper characters, and epic high-level combat. It wasn't my favorite perhaps, but I blame both Fallout games for it. They just took my life over. Anyway, Infinity Engine's final glorious swan song was Icewind Dale 2 from 2002. It brilliantly adapted the new, complex AD&D 3rd edition rule set into that classic, real-time with pause system, and it's my personal favorite game based on the engine. The 2000s were all about that 3rd edition rule set. The first attempt was Ill-Fated Pool of Radiance Runes of Myth-Draenor from 2001. It was a buggy, turn-based mess, but an important first step. The true revolution came with 2002's Neverwinter Nights. It was a full 3D game with a decent campaign centered around the cure for a mysterious plague, but its true legacy was the Aurora toolset, which gave players the power to be the dungeon master, creating and hosting their own online campaigns. And that's what it was mainly used for. The online community for it exploded, and people still play it like that to this very day. For genre purists, the Temple of Elemental Evil from 2003 was a dream. It was a brutally faithful, turn-based adaptation of the 3.5 rule set and revolved around suspected rise of evil originating from the titular temple. On the other end of the spectrum, Forgotten Realms' Demon Stone from 2004 was a pure action game with a story by R.A. Salvatore, proving that AD&D could also be a fun, action-packed cinematic brawler. The AD&D decade closed out early in 2006 with Neverwinter Nights 2 by Obsidian, a legendary studio responsible for some of the greatest and most meaningful role-playing adventures ever told. It built on the original's foundation with a much stronger single-player story and an incredible expansion called Mask of the Betrayer and an even deeper focus on your party and their relationships. It is considered as one of the greatest AD&D experiences ever made. 2010s were a time of change. The industry focused more on action rather than stat-heavy gaming, and most of the few left out there AD&D devs made a terrible mistake. Instead of sticking to what genre did best and was best known for, they decided to follow these misguided trends. Yeah, it's a personal take on the matter, you don't have to agree. But if you don't, or do for that matter too, let me know in the comments below. The big push towards more accessible action and online games resulted in a simple co-op action RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons Daggerdale from 2011, and the much more recent 2021's Dark Alliance, both of which had pretty mixed receptions. The modern MMO craze may have reached the AD&D shores late, but it didn't skip them. And in 2006 and 2013 respectively, Dungeons & Dragons Online and Neverwinter released. Both were rather big free-to-play MMORPGs, but approached the formula from two different angles. The first was trying to mix AD&D with World of Warcraft-inspired mechanics, the second banked on faster and more approachable action. Both are still running, but calling them successful would be a bit of a stretch. We also saw Sword Coast Legends in 2015, an ambitious but flawed attempt to bring back the player as DM dynamic of Neverwinter Nights. And then, in 2023, Larian Studios released Baldur's Gate 3. Coming from their incredible Divinity Original Sin games, they took what worked in these titles, gave it a new, very cinematic feeling coat of paint and encased it all in deep, detailed and satisfying AD&D lore and plot. This wasn't just a sequel. It was a seismic event that took over the world of gaming and created many YouTube careers in a span of just a couple of years. It took the player freedom and systems-driven design of a tabletop game and merged it with unparalleled cinematic storytelling and production values. In my eyes, it's a worthy culmination of everything that came before. The tactical turn-based combat of the Gold Box, the story and companions of the first Baldur's Gate, and the player freedom of Neverwinter Nights. It set a new standard for what a big-budget RPG can be. What a ride! From tactical grids to real-time action, from player-made modules to blockbuster cinematic epics, the evolution of D&D on PC has always been a battle of two ideas: faithfully recreating the tabletop rules versus creating a compelling, character-driven video games. For decades, games leaned one way or the other, never really managing to find the sweet spot. But now, with games like Baldur's Gate 3, or even two brilliant Pathfinder games based on Pathfinder's system that originated from revised 3rd edition of AD&D, it feels like those two paths have finally merged, creating experiences that feel both authentically D&D and revolutionary as games. And I know that I went fast through it all, but there was a lot to cover. So tell me, what's your favorite D&D or AD&D game on this list? Which one holds that special place in your adventuring heart? Let me know in the comments below. If you somehow survived this marathon trip through RPG history, try to roll a natural 20 on that like button, and make sure not to critical miss that sub and bell icons either. Thanks a lot for watching, take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you soon.